For those of you who want to gather materials, the first thing I'm going to show you, we're not going to do together. You could do it later. Um, the ingredients for what we're making was posted with the material list, and I'll also post on Pinterest different examples of how to use the recipe. And then for the second half of our time together, we're going to make drums out of recycled materials. So if you have anything with a round top, a cup, a tape dispenser, a can, just make sure there's no sharp edges in there, a jar, and then something to cover it with. Maybe saran wrap, plastic bag, parchment paper, and then either tape or rubber bands will be helpful also. Yes, that is the plan for today.
All right, we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
So welcome everybody to Wednesday of Global Explorers Week. Jacy just went over some materials that you'll need for today. I'm sure she'll continue to go over those throughout the activity today, but she's going to talk to you about Brazil. We're very excited. Today, as you can tell, is a webinar day. So if you have any questions, you can type it into the chat window, or you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I will pop in occasionally if you do have questions, if she doesn't see it, so I can ask for you. And that's it. So without further ado, let's Brazil.
All right, let's do this. Okay. So there we go. We are talking about Brazil today. Like I was saying a minute ago, both my parents are from Brazil. Look at my trusty map. So this book is a super cool map book. It's called Maps. It is by, and I'm not sure how to pronounce these people's names properly, so please excuse me, but my best guess would be Alexandra Miskielska and Daniel Miskielenski. And one of the reasons why I like this book so much is that it doesn't just show you the land. It shows you a whole bunch of other stuff too. All right, so it's not like your typical map book. So on this map, my mom is from the city down here called Curitiba. Curitiba was populated by a lot of German families, and that has had a big influence on the culture in that city. And my dad is from, it's not on here, but he's from around here in Brazil. He grew up on a tributary of the Amazon, ate a lot of food out of that river that he lived close to. And then he for most of his life, lived in a city called Campo Grande, which is in a state called Mato Grosso. And that part of Brazil had a lot of Japanese immigrants. And so there's a lot of Japanese influence in that part of Brazil. So you may have noticed Brazil in some ways is like the United States. There was an indigenous population who was living here. There were people who were living on this continent when the Portuguese and the Spaniards came to the land. So there is a history of the indigenous people, and a lot of people in Brazil have that in their blood. When the Europeans came, initially the Spanish and the Portuguese, that also left a huge influence on the country. And so a lot of people in Brazil also have Spanish and mostly Portuguese roots. The Portuguese are the ones who colonized pretty much all of Brazil, which is why Brazil speaks Portuguese and not Spanish, like the rest of South and Central America, although there are other languages spoken around South and Central America. But it's one of the things that makes Brazil a little bit different from its neighboring countries. Brazil is not considered a Hispanic country. It is, however, considered part of Latin America, and it's because it was not colonized mostly by Spain. It's colonized by Portugal. All right, so a couple interesting things. Curitiba, the city where my mom is from, is famous around the world for two different things. First of all, they have one of the best recycling programs in the world, and it is older than a lot of other recycling programs. So when I was in high school, and people were recycling, but you couldn't get just like regular pickup at your curb, there was already a full-fledged recycling system that was happening in Curitiba. And the way they got it functioning so quickly and with so many people was that they taught the curriculum in school. So the kids had it as a part of their education at school, and they brought it home and taught their parents. And so the kids taught the older people in the community how to recycle and why it was important to recycle. And I think that's pretty cool. The other thing that Curitiba is famous for is it has one of the best bus systems in the world. Many people from around the world will go to Curitiba to see how their public transportation system works, to see if they can do the same thing. And it's hard because a lot of cities would have to completely rebuild their public transportation system, which gets to be really expensive. But Curitiba has a special system where neighborhood buses bring you to the next level of buses that bring you closer to the city, and you pay before the bus comes. So when the bus comes, everybody just has to get on, and you have a protected tube that you get to wait in after you've paid. And it makes the bus system go much faster. So a little suggestion to the rest of the transit in the world: have people pay before the bus even comes. It goes a little bit faster. And so I want to show you a few other things before we get to our deliciousness. Culture is a lot of different things. It's language. We talked about how in Brazil they speak Portuguese, but there's also a lot of other languages that are spoken because lots of other people from around the world came. I'd mentioned the Japanese and the Germans. There's also a large Dutch population that came to Brazil. But then don't forget, there was also the people who were living here before the Europeans made it over. In the Amazon, there's a whole bunch of different people who spoke different languages, who lived in different ways, who ate different foods, who are essentially separate cultures. And one of those cultures is called the Tu-Guarani, and that's where my name comes from. So everybody calls me Jacy because it's a little bit easier than saying how my name really is. And there's a whole story that goes along with it that I won't share with you today, but if you're interested, you're more than welcome to ask me. My name is actually pronounced Jacy, and my name means moon in Tu-Guarani. Now, my oldest sister, her name is Narima. Her name comes from a legend where she fell in love. It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet. She fell in love with the enemy, with the son of the enemy tribe. And because they couldn't be together, she cried so hard that she created Iguaçu Falls, Foz Iguaçu. Now, these are some of the biggest waterfalls in the world, and there's a whole bunch of them in a small space. They border the country of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. I have been there. It is super cool. There's all these little animals that try to steal your food. I forget what they're called, and their picture's not on here. But it is a really neat, if you ever get a chance to visit, that is a really neat place to see. So my sister's name is Narima, and the legend is she cried so hard she created these falls. And my middle sister's name is Yara, which is the story of the Little Mermaid, but way before the Little Mermaid even existed, where she was a mermaid who fell in love with somebody on the land. And so all three of us have names from the Tu-Guarani language because my dad, having grown up not too far from where the Tu-Guarani lived, grew up reading their fables and their stories, and he fell in love with all of them. So all of our names are attached to the books that he read as a kid. So my dad was living up here. He decided to go to med school, and he worked really hard to get himself there. So he went to school in Curitiba. My mom's dad was his teacher. He met my mom. They got married and moved to the United States. So my sisters and I were all born here. So we each have a little bit of a different perspective of what Brazil is and what Brazil is like in our lives, because each one of us experienced our parents living in the United States in a little of a different way. So to me and to my sisters, one of the huge things about Brazilian culture is food. One of my favorite things to eat, we talk about comfort food. You know, oftentimes in Brazil, we talk about like mashed potatoes and that kind of stuff. This is my Brazilian comfort food, feijoada. It's rice and beans, usually with sausage or some other kind of meat in there, rice, vegetable, depending on what vegetables you like. Collard greens are really big in Brazilian food, and either orange slices or cucumber slices. One of my favorite meals. I also love pão de queijo. They call these cheese buns. These are little drops of deliciousness. It's corn-based dough. Sometimes it's made out of corn, sometimes it's made out of manioc flour with cheese on the inside. Super delicious. This is moqueca, which is kind of like a fish or seafood stew, which is also like a comfort food to a lot of us Brazilians. But one of my favorite things of all time, which I'm going to show you how to make today, is a brigadeiro. Here they call it a chocolate cake. I would more describe it as like deliciousness of fudge dipped in sprinkles. So let's get started with that. Okay, so making brigadeiros is actually a 2-day process. I saved you the boring part where last night I cooked together a can of condensed milk, and I added 4 tablespoons of cocoa powder. You can also use, there's different brands that have like a square of chocolate. You don't want semi-sweet, you want the one that's like the bitter chocolate, because the condensed milk is already super sweet. You don't need any more sugar for it. I tend to buy the Hershey's because you can use the Hershey's for a whole bunch of different things. But the melted tabs are actually a little bit easier to use, because sometimes with this chocolate, if you don't get it in just right, it might make it a little bit chunky. All right, you also are going to need some little tiny baking cups. Now, these are not muffin size, and they're not the mini muffin size. They're even smaller. They're sometimes hard to find. I tend to find them at places that have like international foods. I feel like it's a little more likely to find these there. All right, now I seem to have misplaced my brigadeiros. I will be right back. I am so sorry. I must have dropped it along the way. All right, thanks for waiting. So I cooked over the stove the condensed milk and the cocoa. And you have to be very careful when you cook it. You have to cook it slowly. You can't let it boil because it'll get chunky, and you have to keep stirring it. So I saved you the boring part. You don't have to sit here and watch me stir for 15 minutes. I cooked it, and then you pour it on a plate and leave it in the refrigerator overnight. So it used to be liquidy, and now it's kind of this sticky, thick consistency. Now, one of the things of being the child of immigrants is that countries change after our parents leave. And our parents bring, and they kind of hold on to the things that they did when they lived in that country when they go to their new country. So I'm going to start showing you the more traditional way of making brigadeiros. And then I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff that people have been doing ever since to kind of make it a little more interesting. Okay, so after you cook it, you put it in the fridge, you let it cool. The next day you take it out, it's hard. So I'm going to start by pulling up my hair so I don't get hair in my food. And you should, of course, also wash your hands before you serve anybody else any food. So I'm going to take a little bit of butter. I'm going to leave that open there. You take a little bit of butter and put it in your hands. You don't want too much because it'll get too slippery. And then you're going to scoop just a little bit of this fudgy deliciousness into your hand. Now, the butter is to make it so it doesn't stick to your hand. 'Cause if you look at my thumb, you see how gooey that is? You want to be able to roll it. Now, this takes a bit of practice. I have been doing this for longer than I can remember. At Brazilian parties, you will oftentimes see huge trays of these, and to make them one by one like this takes a long time. So we usually have a bit of an assembly line going. Once you have it in a good ball shape, drop it into the sprinkles. Get it all covered up, and voila, brigadeiro. They do have dairy in them. I'm sure there is a condensed milk non-dairy supplement. I'm not sure what that is, although I should find out since I don't eat very much dairy myself. I will say I will make exceptions for these. All right, so you roll it up, drop it in, and these are the more traditional ones. Now, usually you would see them with brown sprinkles. I think it's mostly just because, you know, a long time ago, they didn't really have a lot of these dyes and such for these colorful sprinkles. I tend to like the colorful sprinkles just because they look more festive and fun. But the, you know, the brown ones that seem like they're chocolate, they're really just brown, will work just fine. And you can make them as big or as little as you want. Something else you can do if you don't have time or you don't have the energy to roll all of them, there's also something called brigadeirão. That ending part, ão, means big, big brigadeiro. So you can essentially take a plate and pour all the brigadeiro on there and just cover it with sprinkles. And then when people come to serve themselves, they just take a spoonful. So that's another way that you can do it. Okay, that is the more traditional brigadeiro. I want to show you some other stuff that you can do too. Okay, so this is the brigadeiro before it goes in the fridge. I will admit I got some help from some younger people in my life to stir it while it was cooking, so it's not as smooth as the one that I made yesterday. Got a little too hot. That's why you're not supposed to let it boil, because when you let it boil, you kind of get those little pieces in there, but it still tastes delicious. So one of the things that people have started doing with brigadeiros now is putting fruit in them. So you just kind of drop it in there. I've been keeping this warm in some warm water, but if you do it fresh off the stove, they're easier to dip. It was just hard to get a computer in front of a stove and not have to cause a whole bunch of problems for myself. All right, and then you can put these on a piece of parchment paper to cool and put in the fridge for later. All right. So I have grapes and bananas here, but you can also use apple pieces. Or I have seen people do them with mango chunks. And then you could, you know, I haven't tried it, but I'm sure you could put like pretzels in there or like a hazelnut in there. I have also seen, which I have not tried yet because I'm not a very good baker, as you can tell from my chunky brigadeiro here. I watched a video once where a person made a cake, and it was a 3-layer cake. They put the 3 layers together, but didn't put the icing on the outside yet. They cut a hole in the middle of the cake. They took out the top 2 layers from the hole. So if you can imagine a cake with a well in the middle, and then the person filled the inside of the cake with brigadeiro and fruit. And it looked so good. That is still on my quarantine list of things for me to try to do, because that looked not so difficult. Doesn't really bother me if my cake looks funny, as long as it has all that stuff in there. So if you try this recipe, I'm curious to hear what you think. I'm also curious if you have any other ideas of how you can use it, right? Because that's how culture changes, and that's how culture evolves, is we take ideas that we like and we do new things with them. And I think that's pretty exciting. All right, so I will apologize again. These are delicious. I hope that they look delicious, and I hope that I'm not leaving anybody too horribly upset that they don't get to eat one right now. Okay, I'm gonna clear all of this stuff off. I wanna talk to you a little bit about Brazilian music. I am super sticky. Okay. Ooh. I'm gonna grab a towel. Okay, so like I mentioned, much like the United States, Brazil had a lot of people from other countries come. And a lot like the United States, Brazil has a history where people were brought from Africa to be slaves on the coffee plantations, the banana plantations, and the introduction of African culture to Brazil is what shaped not only a lot of the food that Brazilians eat, but also the music. Now, Brazil's famous for Carnival, where they play a music called samba, and they wear costumes and they have competitions. A lot of people don't know that parade is actually a competition. There's different samba schools, and they spend most of the year preparing their costumes, their instruments, their dances, all of that for Carnival, and then they compete for the winner of who did the best job. I also would like to mention that it goes on for hours. And just to have the stamina to dance that long, I think is impressive. And to do it in the costumes that they do is gorgeous and I think impressive. And it's something that as a Brazilian, I'm proud of the things that people have accomplished, and proud of the fact that Brazilian culture is so enmeshed with African culture that a lot of people can't even separate the two. So some of the instruments that Africans brought along with them were the drums. Drums were not a big part of music in Europe to the extent that it was in Africa. And when the Europeans and the Africans intermingled in Brazil, it created a very unique sound of music. I also cannot go on without mentioning soccer. I'm gonna take a little side trip with you. Soccer is a huge, huge deal in Brazil. And when I say soccer, of course, I mean football, as it's called in Brazil, is huge. I mean, it is everything to so many people. And it is the game that most kids play out on the street, partially because a lot of people in Brazil are living in poverty. And to have a sport where all you need is a single ball and a whole bunch of people can play is really attractive. You don't necessarily need a court, you just need an open space and a ball, and maybe not even a soccer ball, maybe you're using something else for a ball, but it makes it really achievable for people to play something like that on a regular basis. This is a very famous stadium, Maracanã, in Rio de Janeiro, where lots of different famous soccer games have played, lots of famous people have played, and there's no way to talk about Brazil and not talk about soccer. But going back to music, I would like to show you some different ways that you can make drums, because the truth of it is those African drums had a huge impact on American music also. So unfortunately, we won't need sprinkles for this, although sprinkles can possibly make everything better. Okay. So the idea behind a drum is that it's an instrument, it's a percussive instrument, which means that when you hit it with something, whether your hand, a stick, a mallet, it makes a sound, right? It's different from a flute. A flute is a wind instrument. You need your breath to make it make sound. Percussion instruments are instruments that you hit with your hand or a stick. So, like I said earlier, you just need anything that has an opening, a circular opening tends to work best. You can have one that is solid on the end or something that's open on the end. And see if you can find something to put over the top that will be a little bit stretchy. Regular paper won't necessarily work, but either parchment paper or wax paper will give you a good sound. So just in case anybody needs to go grab materials, I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And I'm going to give you a couple interesting facts about the Brazil compared to the United States that a lot of people are surprised by. If you're on a hunt for materials, you are also going to need some rubber bands. And if you want to decorate your drum, anything to decorate with. All right, so some interesting facts a lot of people don't know about Brazil. Brazil has a population of 200 million people. A lot of people think of Brazil as being a small country. It's actually the 5th largest in the world. The United States has, 314 million. So it's bigger than Brazil, but it's not quite as small as some people think it is. So if you want to talk about area, Brazil is 3,287,612 square miles, right? So about 3 million, just under 3,300 miles square. The United States is 3,794,100. So about 3,800 miles. So although the United States is bigger, not by all that much. That was something that growing up, I found out people were really surprised to find out how big Brazil actually is. The other thing that people were really surprised by when I was growing up is that people did not know that Brazil did not speak Spanish. When I was going to school, lots of people assumed that I was Spanish speaking because my family was from Brazil, and that is not the case. Brazil speaks Portuguese. Something else interesting about Brazil is it has an enormous amount of biodiversity. The rainforest goes along the Amazon across this part of the country, and it is home to so many different species of animals that we are very familiar with. There's anaconda, there's manatee, there's dolphins, there's turtles, there's frogs, there's sloths, there's all sorts of different kinds of birds. And I have a story to share with you that I still, when I think back, I cannot believe that this is really something that I lived through. So my family, when my dad turned 70, my dad wanted to show us around where he grew up. And so we took a bus and we traveled around this part of Brazil, which we hadn't seen much because we usually would go see my mom's family and spend most of our time down here. It's a little more familiar with this part of Brazil. Wasn't really familiar with the rural part of central Brazil. And so we got to go to what's called an eco farm, where the people who own the farm were also trying to educate the other farmers of how to keep their cattle safe, because a lot of farmers were trying to eliminate the predators for the cows rather than keeping the cows safe from the predators, right? If you are allowing your cow to go very close to the forest, it is likely that your cow is going to get eaten by a jaguar. So if you don't let your cow go so close to the forest, the jaguar is not going to come further out from the forest to get your cow. That was one of the things that they were trying to teach the other farmers. Something else they were trying to teach the farmers was a sick cow is much more likely to die from illness and then get bit by a snake rather than what the farmers thought was happening, where the snakes were coming after their cows. So this place that we went to educated the other farmers and let them know, if you vaccinate your cows, they won't, not as many of them will get sick. And so the snakes won't come after them. And it was an interesting experience coming from, I'm not a farmer, I don't live on that continent. And the idea of being a farmer and having to keep your animals safe from jaguars was not something I'd ever really considered. But so we got to do a lot of fun things. We got to go on a nocturnal safari where we saw ocelots and all sorts of other nocturnal animals in their native habitat. But the coolest part that we got to do was we went on a hike and we got to a part that was close to the water, and there was a small fence in front of us. And when I say small, the fence was lower than my waist. It was a set of trees that were about this wide along. So the fence was only about, this wide and about long enough for 4 people to stand side by side. And there was more than 4 of us, so we were kind of doubled up a little bit. And our guide tells us to stay behind that fence, and he went to the water and he slapped the water and called out 3 names. Sago, which means blind, mala, which means luggage, and to be honest, I did forget the 3rd. But when he did that, slapped the water and called out those 3 names, 3 caiman came walking out of the water and stopped right in front of him. Now, caiman are small alligators. Alligators. These alligators, he called them, he knows them by name. He grew up with them. The one they call Sago lost an eye because a hunter tried to get him and they saved him from the hunter. So that's why they call him blind. They called the other one Mala because back in the day, they used to make luggage out of alligator skin. And the 3rd one also had a very clever name that I can't remember. But so the man slaps the water, calls the 3 names, the 3 caiman come out of the water, and he feeds each one of them a little bit of piranha that he had in his pocket. And he talked about how these are the only 3 caiman that he does this with. And he does it to help educate people on how to be safe around the caiman so that they don't feel like they have to hunt the caiman, and to educate those of us that come from other countries of what the land is like around there and why it's so important for us to preserve it. So that was super cool. And then on a different day, we went fishing for piranha. We had bamboo poles with fishing line with chicken on the end. We fished for piranha, and if a piranha got on your line, you were told to hold the line as far away from you as possible and hand it to the guide. Because when those piranha come out of the water, they come out, and if your finger gets stuck in there, gone. One clean sweep. So you'd catch the fish, you'd hand your pole over, the guide would take the piranha off the hook. He would either slap the water or whistle. If he slapped the water, one of those 3 caiman would come. If he whistled, a hawk would come. And he would toss the piranha out in the water, and these animals would come and eat. And again, it was only with certain animals that they had had interactions with because the animals had been damaged or hurt, and they were able to reintroduce them out into the wild. And they use these opportunities to show us how important it is for the ecosystem to be healthy for all these animals to remain. Okay, so I'm hoping, I see Arden, you asked about tissue paper. Yes, tissue paper should work, but you should probably do more than 1 layer because 1 layer might tear when you use it. Okay, hoping you all have your materials. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm gonna try this can. I'm excited about the can because it's got this sound that goes with it, and it also has this in it still. Now, I did cut this open and I tried to make sure there's no sharp edges around this inside that's gonna cut me, but I can see that it's sharp right here. So I'm gonna be extra careful with that little area right there to keep my fingers safe. Depending on what kind of sound you want or on how much you want to experiment, I suggest mixing different materials to see what kind of sounds you get. Now, lots and lots of cultures around the world use drums, And although it's all essentially the same concept, they're all a little bit different, and they're used in a different way, and they have different elements about them. And I think that that is something that is so interesting about human beings in general, is how we can come up with the same idea, but apply it in different ways. All right, so I put that paper on there. I'm gonna hold it on there with this rubber band. I'm gonna test it out and see what kind of sound this gives me. Ooh, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but when I hit it, there's the sound of the drum that I'm hitting here, but then you can also hear that little ring of the lid on the inside. Ooh, that makes for a good instrument. Ooh, and it's a good shaker too. All right. But I want to see what it's like with a plastic top instead. Curious how that will change the sound. All right, I'm going to tighten this rubber band a little extra because I want to see if I can get a good tight seal around this plastic. The tighter your drum top is, the higher the sound is going to be. All right, let's see how that one sounds. It's a little bit lower than I thought it was going to be. All right, that's what a can might sound like. I'm curious how an open-ended one would sound differently. Would sound different, I should say. Let's see. Now, the interesting thing about the open-ended drum is that it gives you an opportunity to put your hand on the inside to change the sound. There is a Brazilian drum called a cuica, and it's kind of this iconic Brazilian sound. It sounds almost like somebody like rubbing on a little bit of plastic. Let's see how this one turns out. All right, will it sound different when my hand is in there? Let's see. Not quite as much as I'd hoped. I bet a bigger coffee can, doing the same with a coffee can. I wonder if that would be a little bit different. All right, I want to try one more. Curious how this, let's try this glass jar with this parchment paper. Ooh. I kind of like that flat quality to the sound, where this one had that little ringing to it at the end. This one does not have that at all. All right, so those are some different ways that you can experiment with making a drum. And if you are interested in different kinds of drums other than just ones that are similar and typical in Brazilian music, you can look at either different cultures kinds of drums and see if you can look at the different shapes and how tight the top of the drum is, if it's open, if it's closed, is it tall, is it short, is it narrow, is it wide, because each one of those will make a different sound. Something else that can be really, really fun, if you have a larger box. I did once make the kind of bass drum that you see in marching bands out of a big cat litter box. So I cut sides, 2 circles at the sides of the box, and I covered those with, believe it was construction paper. And then I made straps and everything. And I made myself a bass drum. And I've also made, if you do 3 drums like this, you can connect them and make the 3 drums that you see in a marching band also. And so I am curious if anybody was able to make a drum, and I'm curious what you used when you made it. If you want to throw that into the chat, that'd be fantastic. I also am curious if anybody has any other suggestions of how to use the brigadeiro mixture. My daughters and I were talking about experimenting and trying a bunch of different things, different nuts and pretzels. Somebody even had the idea of using gummy candy in the middle, which I thought would be interesting, although I'm not a huge fan of gummy candy. And so if you have any suggestions, or if you're excited to share how you made your drum or what you used, I'd be excited to hear from. All right, so Arden's saying that she used a tape roll with 2 layers of tissue paper on top and on bottom. Thank you so much. See, this is why I need you all with me. So when I made this tape roll, you put juice in it, not on the bottom. Oh, you only put it on one side? But you could, if you have an open one, you could cover both ends and be able to use both ends, or some drums that are made like that too. And then you also can experiment if you have any stretchy fabric at home to see what kind of sound that makes. And if you have either a hollow drum or, a hollow drum or a drum that's not hollow on the bottom, you can always consider putting beads or something like that on the inside so that when you hit it, it makes that little rattle sound. So if you're familiar with a snare drum, which is the middle drum in a drum kit, or also is the singular drum in a marching band, it has pieces of metal underneath the top part, and that's what makes that kind of rasping sound. And you can turn it on and off, which is also interesting, in case you didn't know that. But that's that unique sound that a snare drum has, where it sounds like it's kind of like rubbing on something. It's because there's 2 metal, or maybe it's 3 metal pieces inside the drum, and you could create something similar by putting beads in a can or beads in a jar, so then when you hit it, it rattles. Oh, awesome, Arden, you put 4 beads in your drum. I wish. If you are able to, I would love like a little short video, because I want to hear what that sounds like. Because the tape roll, right, this is all physics. The tape roll is thicker around the outside than the can is. It's also made of a different material, so this cushions the sound more. For those of you that don't know, sound moves in waves. And this slows the waves down and kind of stop them from moving, whereas this one kind of echoes the waves because of the material is a little bit different. So this would dampen the sound, and this is going to make the sound, it's going to amplify it in a way. So those are things you want to think about when making your drum too. It would be really neat to make a bunch of different drums and see if you can get a bunch of people to play them with you, and see what kind of sounds or songs you come up with. And of course, if you do, send me some pictures and some videos. It's so much fun to be getting back the information that you guys are giving us in terms of what you're doing with what you're learning from us. And so please keep those coming. All right, does anybody have either any questions, or does anybody else know anything about Brazil that I did not mention? Out of curiosity. I talk to my daughters about how they're half Brazilian a lot of the time. And when I was preparing for this, I was asking them the kinds of things that they remember and the things that are important to them about being Brazilian. And one of the things that came up that we do all the time in my family is in Brazil, and I don't know if they still do this, but they did when my parents were growing up, and so my family still does this. When you sneeze, what people say to you depends on how many times you have sneezed. So the first time you sneeze, you get told saúde, health to you. If you sneeze again right away, someone will say to you, amor, love, right? So the first time you sneeze, they wish you health. The second time you sneeze, they wish you love. The third time you sneeze, they wish you cariño, affection. You're sick. You must need health. You must need love. You must need affection. But if you sneeze that fourth time, which isn't all that common, they wish you money. So it's saúde, amor, cariño, dinheiro. So we always, if someone sneezes 4 times, that's exactly how we do it. And then by the time you get to the money, you go, dinheiro! Because then you're going to be rich if you sneeze 4 times in a row. Now, of course, if that were the case, the world would be a little bit of a different place. But it's one of the fun things, one of the fun traditions that my family keeps going from when I was a kid that I have now taught my kids. Okay. Nobody else wants to share how they made their drum? All right, maybe you want to send me some pictures later. And then we've got a few more minutes, so let me share a couple more things with you. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, Arta just wrote in the chat that she's going to put a bell inside to see what it does. This is part of what I love about Creators Workshop. I really try not to give you guys a project where I'm telling you exactly what to do. I'm really hoping that I'm just giving you ideas and you can make your own final product. The bell inside sounds like a really neat idea. I'm going to need a video of that too, Arden. Okay. So Brazil is well known for a few different products. Brazil is well known for coffee. I don't know if it still is, but there was a period of time that Brazil produced more coffee than any other country in the world. Brazil is also known for the architecture in its capital, Brasilia. The entire city is are buildings that are very unique and interesting. I have not been there myself, but the pictures that I've seen are super cool. I suggest looking into them. There is also something called Guaraná that grows in Brazil. In Brazil, they have a like a soda pop that is made out of Guaraná. It is super delicious, but has a ton of caffeine in it. But it is so yummy. It's one of my favorite things, one of my favorite treats. Brazil also has a large amount of bananas that they grow. And as we talked about before in the feijoada, black beans is a huge part of the Brazilian diet. To the extent that a lot of families have black beans on a daily basis. And something else interesting about food in Brazil is in the United States, our biggest meal tends to be dinner, whereas in Brazil, the biggest meal tends to be lunch. And so when I was a kid, I lived in Brazil for a couple years, and lunch was such a big deal. It was the family meal that most parents, if they worked, went home for lunch, and the schools closed for lunch. When I was growing up in Brazil, we only went to school for half a day, and the school closed a little on the before lunch so that everybody could go home and families could have lunch together. And then the afternoon session of school, which is a separate group of kids, didn't start until after lunch was finished. So lunch was like the big main meal, and a lot of times people almost always would have rice and beans with their lunches. One of my other, I have lots of favorite things. One of my other favorite things is passion fruit. All the places in Brazil that I have traveled, there are fresh juice shops all over the place, where you can go in and you can get some mango puree or some lime juice, or my absolute favorite, passion fruit juice. And I tell you, if you and I are ever in Brazil together and I get some passion fruit juice, please don't talk to me because I am busy. That stuff is so good. And if you are curious about what it tastes like, there are a few grocery stores in Evanston that sell different fruit purees in the frozen section. And so I have seen at a few different places around Evanston that you can buy passion fruit pulp, and you can make juice out of it, and it is really just so good, so good. It is also very tart. So you need to add some sweetener. I know a lot of people add sugar. I like to add honey, and it is, oh my goodness, so delicious. And there was one more. Here, okay. This is the Brazilian pine tree. Now it's funny because when we think of, when a lot of people think of the country of Brazil, they think about the rainforest. And when you think about rainforest, a lot of people don't think about pine trees, right? It's kind of like when I went to the desert in New Mexico for the first time and it was wooded. I did not know there was wooded deserts, but there are. And there's also pine trees in more tropical areas. Now, what I love about these pine trees is that they have these long trunks and they have these little, let's see if I can get you a little bit closer if it'll stay in focus. You can see that all those little leaves, they point up to the sky. They're almost like a whole bunch of upside down rainbows. And they have these nuts, piña. These nuts, you roast them. They're kind of like chestnuts in a way. They don't taste the same, but it's kind of that same concept. You can roast a chestnut and you kind of peel that outside and eat the inside. That's what these are. These are super delicious. I also am a huge fan of manioc flour. We put ground manioc flour on our rice and beans. We call it farinha. Or if you want to cook it, maybe with some garlic and onion and fry it up a bit, you call it farofa. Those two are super, super delicious. And then of course, there's all the interesting animals in Brazil. We talked a little bit about them earlier, but one of my favorite things, you know, I spent most of my life on the North Shore of Chicago, and a common squirrel monkey is a funny name to me. To think that monkeys are common in certain area of the world, even though I know it to be, I just still think it's so funny. A common squirrel monkey. The squirrel monkey doesn't seem so common to me. And of course, there's piranhas, fish with teeth, neon tetras. A lot of people have these in their fish tanks. Those are in Brazil also. And then they also have these Goliath bird-eating spider. I have not seen one of those, and I would kind of like to prefer to keep it that way. That seems a little terrifying to me. And then, oh, here, I wanted to show you this. This is somebody playing the cuica drum, and you can see his hand is in there. So you beat it with one hand, and then you put your other hand inside to kind of change that sound. All right. Let's see, does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything they wish they would have known, or anything they're interested in finding out? How did your drums turn out? Are you gonna make some brigadeiros next time you can get someone to go to the store to get some condensed milk if you don't have any at home? So curious about all of it. Hopefully next summer, we will be able to have, camp where we get to be together. And I would love for us to make a whole bunch of handmade drums and see if we can make some music together. I think that would be really fun. Hi there, Natalie.
Hi, I hear a kitty cat.
Yes.
Hi, kitty. Cool. So many fun things today.
I will, I'll try to save you some brigaditos, but I can't make any promises.
Okay. All
I will
right.
promise to make them for you another time, though.
Awesome. I will hold you to that. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We will either see you this afternoon with Wes, or maybe tomorrow, or sometime next week. But in the meantime, Ridgeville hug. Thanks,
And
Miss
join
Kate.
me for Australia tomorrow.
Yay!
So we can chat.
Yeah, and we can see each other. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Jacy.
Thank you all. Have a good day.